Hello, my name is Megan Russell and I'm coming to you from Skokie Public Library outside of Chicago. And before I throw it the panel, I throw it to Ashley, let me just say a few words about the Adult Reading Roundtable and the organization that is helping with organizing this program. The Adult Reading Roundtable has been dedicated to developing readers' advisory skills and promoting reading for pleasure through public libraries since 1984, led by Steering Committee of Chicago Area Librarians. ART plans and presents readers' advisory training, in-depth genre studies, book discussion training, and a wide variety of other professional development opportunities for librarians and library staff. ART is also a creator of the ART Popular Fiction List, a self-evaluative training tool used for testing library staff readers' advisory knowledge. The latest edition of the list is available to all ART members and to subscribers of Novelist Plus and to the readers' advisory tools. Thank you and have a good discussion. Now I'm throwing it to Ashley.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Rayner, and I'd like to welcome you to our panel, The Scary Truth About Horror Reviews, sponsored by Cemetery Dance. Like I said, I'm Ashley. I'm a branch manager for the Chicago Public Library at Greater Grand Crossing on the South Side, and I'm so delighted to moderate this panel for reasons that will quickly become clear. So I'm just going to ask each of the people on our panel to introduce themselves. And I was also going to give an icebreaker, which is, what's the scariest book you've ever read? And I think I was talking to Becky about this earlier. I think it's probably Salem's Lot, if only because I couldn't finish it. It was too scary. And I've seen the movie, so I know what happens. I don't know why I couldn't do it. But let's start first with Becky Stratford, please.
Okay, thanks. My name is Becky Stratford. I'm one of the organizers of Librarians Day. I'm also run the blog RA for All and RA for All Horror, and I am the author of the Reader's Advisory Guide to Horror by ALA Editions. The second edition came out in 2012, and I am literally writing the third edition right now. Probably will still be writing it when this goes live, but it's just about done. It's going to be great, and it'll be coming out in 2021. And as we'll talk, I also review horror, but we'll discuss that. My biggest reviewing is for Booklist and Library Journal. I guess all of us should say where we review, because that's what this panel's about. So Booklist and Library Journal, and Novelist, who was mentioned in the opening. The scariest book I ever read, it's interesting, the scariest horror book I ever read is Pet Sematary. So similar, yeah. And that book is so scary. And I remember a story actually my dad telling, but that book was so scary. Like, we watched the movie in freshman year of high school and kids were like, we're going to watch Pet Sematary. And I'm like, nope, going home. Like, they're like, you've already read the book, because my dad told the story, and this made me want to read it when I was a kid. We had a vacation house, and so he'd come on the weekends to see us. And he was telling my mom this, and I was around to hear it, that he loved Stephen King, and he was reading Pet Sematary at home when we weren't there. And he said he had to stop, and that's never happened to him, because he was scaring himself crazy. We don't have any pets, right? He has pets now, but we didn't have any at the time. He was scaring himself crazy. He's like, I gotta wait till you guys are all home. And I was like, that is a book I want to read. But I think I was like 8th grade, and it might have been a little too thin.
Wow. Next, can we please have Sadie Hartman?
Yeah, hi, my name is Sadie Hartman, aka Mother Horror on social media. I am the co-owner of the company Nightworms, which is a monthly horror subscription company. I also review for Cemetery Dance, which is a sponsor of our panel tonight. And I review for Scream Magazine, which is a publication in the UK. And I also write articles for Lit Reactor and Tor Nightfire. I think the scariest book I've ever read, it's kind of twofold because they're almost the same. One is classic and one is modern. It would be The Exorcist. And that is William Peter Blatty, I think is the full name. Yeah, and the modern version of that, for me personally, is A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. And in both books, with the demonic possession, being a mother of a daughter and traveling and navigating through that story, was terrifying for me. Like during A Head Full of Ghosts, I would literally go check on my daughter and make sure she wasn't like, stuck to the wall. Like she's not, like doing something disgusting or this just really super terrifying for me.
So last but not least, of course, Danielle Cruzoni, please.
Hi, I'm Danielle Cruzoni. I review for the New York Times Book Review. I'm the horror columnist. But my primary occupation is a novelist, of course. I've written 5 books, 3 novels, 2 memoirs. What else about me? Oh, I've created an audio drama called Crypto Z, which I'm wearing the t-shirt for. It's really hard for me to choose the scariest book. The ones that I've been thinking about lately are, I don't know if you've seen the movie The Tenant that Roman Polanski directed. I'm reading the book that was adapted from, and it's terrifying. It reminds me a little bit of Brian Evanson, whose short stories really, they're psychological and they're a little bit cynical, and there's just this sort of almost surreal darkness to them that really gets under my skin. If I had to go into the Stephen King canon, I think Carrie really terrified me, because I believe I read it, when I was a teenager. So that sort of situation was terrifying to me, but it's also quite psychological. So a horror that's psychological, it sort of gets under my skin is what scares me most.
I love hearing your responses because they're so varied, but also like this, what really gets under your skin is what really makes the book the scariest to you. Something that I read might not be scary to you and vice versa. It's really fascinating. So to kind of piggyback off of that, why did you all start reading horror? Like what attracts you to this genre? Some of us, me, are a little like scary of stuff like that. So I'm just really curious, why do you all read? Why do you all enjoy this so much? What speaks to you in these books? Becky, you can go first. I'm sorry.
Okay. Then we can switch up the order maybe next time. But so why do I read it? When did I start reading it? This question's been asked me a lot, obviously, in the field I'm in. And so going back, I thought, well, my dad likes Stephen King and it was on the shelf and I read it. But I clearly remember, let's go back a little before I started reading Stephen King. We go to the bookstore at the local, I grew up in New Jersey. So we went to the local mall, right? Like usually after Hebrew school or something like that. So we went out to the local mall and my dad would always allow us to look. And my parents never said no about buying like a book, not every time we went, but they were always very kind about that. And I found the occult section. And I had to have been less than 12 because I was in Hebrew school and you stop after your bat mitzvah. So I was there and I loved the occult section and I found flowers in the attic, right? This is like people of my generation, like this is like our women, especially.
Yeah, it's
this is
the
like
entry-level drug, right?
Yeah,
For me too. Right? That was one of the first ones for me too.
And it's like, and I just couldn't stop. And he had no idea what it was, right? And he knew the occult section was fine because he bought his Stephen King books there. So he was like, sure. So went through all of them. Like, I get one and then like a month later, I get another one. And yeah, those were a lot. But then I really thought about it going back even further. And I think I said this on one of the other panels for Librarians Day. Looking back at my reading, I always liked things that were dark and askew, that were just not what you would call normal, probably. So my favorite author, and Ashley, this is a librarian, they're always doing like things for like Children's Book Week or something like, what's your favorite book when you were a kid, right? And all the library staff do it. Mine's Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein. And my favorite poems and I was obsessed with this book. Like I had the CD, I read it, I memorized the poems. And I bought it for my children the second they were born. But like, I liked the poems that were like, the girl who wouldn't take the garbage out and it like toppled on her and killed her. Like that was my favorite. I didn't think there's anything wrong with it, but apparently it led me to a life of this. So that's my early memories. Danielle, what about you? You said you had PC Andrews also.
Yeah, so my journey into sort of dark literature happened side by side and simultaneously with other kinds of books. I would go to the library and my mom would drop me off in the summer and I would just load up, with a big bag of books, and I would have, everything. But that's how I discovered V.C. Andrews. That's how I discovered Anne Rice. That's how I discovered Stephen King. Like all of these sort of darker horror novels that were out in the 80s and early 90s were just the stuff I was bringing home to read. But at the same time, I was also reading, like, I don't know, more so, from other genres, science fiction, literary fiction, just romance. I think I tried romance, but it never stuck. It just wasn't me. But I was very I was very able to stay just in one kind of genre. But then as I grew older and I went to, I decided I was going to be a writer, I found myself writing darker stories almost unconsciously. And that's the genre that I've gravitated toward as a writer. And, as a reviewer, obviously, as a horror columnist, those are the books that are coming to me. So, it all started at the library.
A lot of good things started at the library. Sadie, what do you think? What drew you to horror?
Same as Becky, like my mom and dad owned a lot of books, and a lot of it was like Anne Rice and stabby books, like murder mystery stabby books like John Stanford and Patricia Cornwell. So I would go through those, like Agatha Christie, and kind of sneak them and not tell my parents that that's what I was doing. And then simultaneously, scholastic book fairs would come to school, and my mom would never let me pick like toys and dumb stuff. She said, from the scholastic book fairs, it always had to be books. And I started getting into the John Bellairs series, A House with a Clock in Its Walls, and just really kind of macabre and gothic, dark stories for children, but illustrated by Gorey. Edward Gorey, and those pictures are really kind of creepy with like lots of bats and scary ladies and gravestones, and that was just my jam when I was a kid. Like I'm a fairly timid person and I have a lot of phobias. I'm afraid of spiders, I'm afraid of crowded places, I'm afraid of heights, like I'm afraid of a lot of stuff, but horror and reading horror is where I can feel like I'm living on the edge a little bit, and it's a little bit spicy. So that's why I read it.
I love that. I guess to me, since we already mentioned a lot of the reviews that you guys write, why do you think writing reviews, especially for something like horror, are important? Is it a way to get people who may not be interested in the genre kind of interested? Like, how, I guess, do you use reviews to like get people or bring people into this genre that you love so much?
I can jump in and answer that, because I've been thinking a lot about this, not only for horror, but for everything with books, especially right now. I feel like we're going through this period where curation and expertise about literature is really undervalued, or it's not happening in the way that is allowing people to find a diversity of books. I was having a conversation with my editor about this very thing during the pandemic. It's like 3 or 4 books at the top are selling all the books, and the whole middle just dropped out during the pandemic because of the traditional ways for people to find books, i.e. going into the library, going into an independent bookstore, talking in public, recommending books. It just disappeared. So all of the books that sold, generally speaking, in horror and other genres, were the ones that had the marketing platform already in place beforehand to just distribute online. And so I think that points to a larger problem that we're facing about curation, right? I think that librarians and book reviewers are experts who curate. We have, I feel very lucky that, and I'm really impressed that the New York Times keeps a columnist on hand to do horror. They do the same with science fiction. They have another one, I believe, for romance, various genres. And that allows me, I've done this for now 2.5 years, in that time to really dig in deep into the genre, get to know people. I'm very lucky. I get to know all of these people who read horror and love horror like I do. But also it allows me to be able to recommend books that I'm finding to perhaps readers who wouldn't normally read horror. And I feel
think
like
that's a really, yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
Sorry. No, continue. Sorry.
Go ahead. I was just going to say that, also I feel like I'm perfectly positioned to be that point, because the New York Times is sort of general readership, right? Very much so. I feel like I'm perfectly positioned to be that point of entry for a lot of people into horror, because I'm someone who I write. So the novels I've written have been categorized everything from supernatural thriller to horror, right? It's kind of weird how I've been categorized, but my 2 nonfiction books have been literary memoir, right? So I'm considered a literary writer, at least in memoir, and horror or supernatural writer in fiction. And so bringing those things together for my personal taste and sort of funneling that into a horror column, I think brings lots of different kinds of people to the genre. So to answer your question, the short answer is that I think that horror reviews do introduce horror to people who may not have had the luck that we've had, as kids to be introduced to it and are coming late. But I also think that it's important for us to really have relationships with horror writers and have relationships with the books and the genre so that we can curate and recommend good ones.
And I think this is a good way to do this, because I think because all 3 of us do review to different audiences. And I think Danielle hit on it exactly correct. So for me, and it's funny because Sadie will be completely different. My audience, I am curating horror for libraries to buy, right? So Danielle mentioned, unless they get in the libraries when they were open, they're open now again, but unless they get in the libraries, people can't find them, right? And Ashley knows this, but the rest of you might not. Many libraries have barriers, especially with the smaller genres where they have less funds to spend. They need there to be a review by someone, somewhere, to say that this book is worth spending money on for their libraries. And maybe unlike a column that Sadie does, or review Sadie does in a horror specific magazine, but that might not be something they trust because they don't know horror very well. So something like Danielle's column has been great, because I tell library workers to go order everything she puts in, because again, it's for a general audience. So I take my job very seriously. I have 2 different places I review mostly for, so professionally. So Booklist, and for Booklist, there's a science fiction, fantasy, and horror section in every issue, and there's one editor for all of them. Most of what she sends me is horror. I occasionally have a science fiction review, which is fun because I also like science fiction. But she's worked really hard. I'll give a shout out to my editor. I know she's going to be watching these, Susan Mcguire. She goes out of her way and has, because she's a fraidy cat too. Ashley knows this because Ashley reviews for her too. And so she has really worked hard to get not just me to review horror, because she wants different perspectives. In fact, recently her and I were discussing how the other person who does the most horror and I seem to like different things, and that's great. But the review I'm writing isn't whether I liked it or not. The review I'm writing is to the library to tell them who the best reader for that book would be. So this is the best reader, and if you have these kind of readers, that's who should get this book. So when I reviewed Survivor Song by Paul Tremblay, I discussed in that review in Booklist why, also librarians are a little bit fraidy cats, as Ashley said, in general. Not just, you're less fraidy cat than most, and so they don't want to read the books, but they need the review to give them the talking points to sell the book, not just to buy it, but also to use the review to hand sell the book to people. So in there, I talk about things like the appeal that we talk about in libraries. So the way it's told. So I focused on Survivor Song to talk about how it's like a big folk song, the whole book, and the relationship between the 2 female leads, and how it's about friendships across the board. And so to tell them what to expect. Very little of the plot, because library workers know how to find the plot, and much more about the feel of the book. Now, that being said, I also only get 175 to 200 words for those reviews. Now in Library Journal, I have a different, so Susan sends me stuff, I get what I get, and I don't get upset. But for Library Journal, it's similar to what Danielle is saying. I get an entire column 4 times a year that I get to curate. And it is my job, and I, again, like Danielle, take it extremely seriously. I want to make sure I am representing a wide variety in terms of the people who are writing it, so that I have people of color, authors of color, but also range of scares. So like Danielle's book, latest book, The Ancestor, is in one of my columns because it's not hardcore scares. It's scary and there are monsters, but it is not going to be Stephen Graham Jones, The Only Good Indians, which was also in that column, right? Or I think that was actually the month before, but the same idea, right? It's not going to be a blood and guts story that's really could pull your heart out. Like, I can't even look at a ceiling fan ever again after reading The Only Good Indians. Go read it. Yeah, Sadie knows. Yeah, don't read it, Ashley. But
don't read that one.
So, but the point is, like, you have to understand your audience and then take it seriously who you're introducing your audience to. There's a ton of authors, Sadie reviews, as I throw it to her, that I can't review for libraries because they're from smaller presses that are too hard to get. And libraries have so many barriers to purchasing. I have to really be conscious of, I can only put like one super indie book in each column, even if it's fantastic. But then Sadie, it's, you do it differently.
Yeah, so my context is totally different. I started off reviewing kind of just as an influencer on social media. I have a really large Instagram account, which is like a little corner of the universe called #Bookstagram. So the people who are following me are already bookish, nerdy people who love to read, and we have these discussions about books all the time. And that's what I was doing, is I was just discussing the books that I was reading, and then people would go and buy them. And I think what ended up happening was both the editors of Cemetery Dance and also Scream were following me on Instagram and seeing the kind of like turn of the screw, if you want to, where it was like, okay, she says, go buy this book, and everyone in the comments is like, okay, I'm getting it now. And they actually do. Like, you can see, from when I say it and when they say they're buying it and then they post it, like you can see like, hey, I got my book mail, and they actually are like, this was on Sadie's recommendation. So then when I started writing professionally as a freelance writer for both Cemetery Dance and Scream, and then various other platforms, my audience, I feel like, is still the same, because it's still in the literary world. It's still people who read a lot and just kind of maybe want to maximize their time. And so I don't really talk a lot about what I don't like. I talk the most about what I love, and then people just go buy it. So it's just like a win-win love fest, for favorite authors. And I think my biggest mission as a reviewer is to get the right book in the right hands and bring about awareness of indie horror, because, a lot of us already know about traditional horror. It's, everywhere on Goodreads, it's advertised to us, people make movies out of it. But the indie horror genre is immense, and there's a wealth of talent. And so that's really what I'm trying to just kind of bring awareness to the bookish world about indie horror.
I have to say, I use Sadie to find the indie horror books. Like I said, I can't put a lot of them in my reviews because libraries won't be able to buy a lot of them, but I do use her to find those authors that are worth my time, and then look into them, and then tell libraries, this is worth the effort, go get this one.
Yeah, they're like little diamonds out there.
I love the idea. And I think all of you kind of touched on the idea of like curation. And so one thing that I am really interested in, Becky mentioned that I write reviews too, but when I ask for books to read, I'm always like, give me the ones with people of color. Give me the ones with people who are marginalized or what have you. And so I wanted to ask you guys, how do you make sure that your reading and reviews stay diverse? And diverse in this case can be genre subdivisions, race, gender orientation, or protagonists, or characters, style. How do you make sure? Because I think if it was up to me, sometimes I'd want to read the same thing over and over again. But how do you make sure that it's diverse? Because there's a responsibility that we all have to make sure that this stuff, these books, get out to the right people. So, like, how do you create the diversity? We'll start with Danielle.
So, my column always is diverse, a diversity of gender. You know, I always make sure that there are an equal amount of women to men in my column. And in the horror genre, as you probably can imagine, there tended to be for a very long time a predominance of male writers. And the horror writers that really bubbled over and sort of became part of the culture, when you think of them, most of them are men, you know, when you think of straight up horror. So, and I also, you know, went back and studied, like, you know, the Stoker Awards. And I was also, the last 2 years I was a jurist for the Pulitzer Prize, which is obviously not horror, but literary. Mm-hmm. And, you know, if you go back and look at those prizes, those are also, up until maybe 10 or 15 years ago, they were all white men, you know, or pretty much all white men. And so I'm very sensitive about gender. I'm sensitive about diversity in lots of other ways too. Mm-hmm. For example, I like to include international horror. You know, the book that I was just talking about by Roland Topor, which Steve Polanski adapted that book as a film, The Tenant. That's a French book published in 1964 that's being reissued by Valancourt right now. And, you know, I like to have, and I also have a Japanese graphic novel coming in my next column. And I love to have that sort of diversity of international and American horror, women and men. You know, and I also have people of color, although I have to say, I have to search. I do include as much, you know, horror by people of color as I can, but I don't know, you know, I look, Sadie, I look to you, Becky, I look to you for that. Yeah. And I do find it, but it's more difficult to find. But that was one of the mandates that my editor at the New York Times said when she hired me, is she's like, you have carte blanche, do what you want. I just ask that you keep it diverse. So that's really a mission of the New York Times too. So that's not just my mission personally, although I think that if I were given that carte blanche, I still would be doing exactly the same thing.
Right.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No.
So I was just going to say, so I work with probably around a dozen publishers, of big publishers and also indie publishers, and I'm just on a list, and they will send me their books for review. And as an influencer and not just a reviewer, I get to like wave the book around and take pretty photos of it and put it on my Instagram. So I get to boost the signal regardless of a review or not. And I think that that's really important. And what I've done is just asked, you know, Macmillan and HarperCollins and Penguin, like, send me everything that falls under the category of horror, and also even horror adjacent. So I've gotten some like pretty spooky sci-fi stuff and some dark fantasy, and let me just show it off. Like, let me just find readers based on, hey, look, this looks awesome. This is by a person of color. This is by, you know, the LGBTQ community. And I might not have time to read, you know, 50 billion books a year, but at least I can showcase them. And that's really important to me. So Twitter, I would say, is a very big resource for finding horror that's diverse, because you can just follow a bunch of authors who are just trying to get their voice amplified. And then I can do that too with retweets and everything. So, you know, of the like 90% of the books that I show, I'm really only reviewing, you know, 10%, because I can squeeze out maybe 150 to 200 books a year and review them as well. But I'm showcasing, you know, a lot more than that.
And it so much, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I try.
Reading this much.
But you know what? That's a great point, Sadie, because I try to take the same thing. I do something like the both of you do. So I started a hashtag horror for libraries, and I use that to showcase horror that I can't necessarily always review. And it's a great way to signal to libraries that this is good book. These are good books. I have a personal mission that I will make sure my columns are diverse. Sadly, I get a lot of comments back from the people at Library Journal that we can always count on you, Becky, to make it diverse, but you know, not everyone does that. So I have a couple ways I can make sure I do that. But I do have to reach out to a lot of authors. Like Danielle said, it's not always easy. I also like to feature international authors too. I think that's an area where we're growing. She mentioned Valancourt. There's the new Valancourt book of international horror that's coming out. That'll be in my column in October.
That's coming out in
That's a very
December,
good
right?
one.
Yeah.
And there's a new collection by Usman Malik that's coming out. Yeah, January or December is the Valancourt. Yes,
Yeah.
The Usman Malik is coming out in February, and that is a Pakistani author who's amazing. And I reached out to him on Twitter and said, hey, because I found him in the Ellen Datlow collections. Let's talk about that too, right? The best horror of the year. Those are collections I tell libraries to buy every single year, because not only does she for years had diverse table of contents with women and men and people, but she writes an entire essay at the beginning that's like 80 pages of the year in horror. And that's where I found Usman Malik originally in those. That's how I first found Stephen Graham Jones, so I reached out to him on Twitter and he said, Becky, and it's a small press, he sent me an ARC, a PDF, so I can read it by the middle of November for my January review column. But I have to go out of my way. I try to find other ways to highlight authors and small presses like on Twitter. But here's the big thing I do. And library workers, I want all of you to do this. Whenever you're writing reviews or you're doing read-alike lists, and in every one of my reviews, I have at least 2 read-alikes. I have challenged myself to never, even if the book is super white male book, have only white, straight male read-alikes. Yeah. And it is a challenge I've given to myself, and I will not ever budge on it, because if I can't find one, that is my fault. A lot of library workers out there, you'll say, oh, it's so hard to find them. But you've heard Danielle, you've heard me, and you've heard Sadie say that we go out of our way to find those for you. So look to us for ideas, but don't ever say, well, Stephen King's the only read-alike. It's not.
No.
I'm writing my whole brand new book, and I put this on Twitter the other day. It is so refreshing. I am not putting a single Stephen King book in any of my lists, because if library workers don't know who Stephen King is,
right? And it's just that he is not the gold standard for horror anymore. He is amazing, and people have been influenced off of him for years and years and years. But this bookshelf behind me, all of these shelves are new horror, and Stephen King is up there. Like, he's way up there. So he's not filling my shelf. Like, these are the people, these women, these men, these people of color, these, indigenous people, like, these are the people back here.
I love it. I love the look into your bookshelf. It's so cool. One thing, because we kind of have touched on this a little bit, but I kind of wanted to get into like the process of writing a review. Do you have do you do outlines? Do you kind of like map it out, or is it just kind of stream of consciousness? Sadie, I would like to start with you, please.
I have really no method to the madness. I really just have a very small framework where I try to hook the reader to listen to my review in the beginning. So I'll say something scandalous, or I'll have an antidote or something just to get people to jump in with me. And then I give a very small synopsis. Like Becky was saying, different reviews for different audiences. My audience are bookish people already, and so they know how to read the back of a book, so I don't do that. I don't rehash the plot. I don't give away any plot details. I am ultra sensitive about spoilers because I'm a fangirl and a reader myself, so I hate spoilers. So I'm really sensitive about spoilers. And then I just talk about my reading experience. What happened to me? What did I feel like? What journey did I go on with this author? What was the intimate relationship that I felt was going on in my head with the author and his words and her words and their words? And like, how did this make me feel? And then towards the end, I kind of, in a blurby sort of way, give my ideas of what readers this would be compatible for, because there's a lot of books out there that aren't for everyone, and I already know that extreme horror fans are not going to want to read this kind of romance adjacent horror, and I know my romance adjacent horror people are not going to want to read this splatter western. So I really try to talk about who would like the book too.
I think that for me too, and Sadie brought up something that I know we have a disagreement on a little bit. I don't ever give away spoilers, but I do have to warn library workers who probably aren't going to read the book. See, that's the difference, right?
True.
What's coming.
Audience.
So Sadie and I were having this conversation about Unreliable Narrators, right? Sadie will never reveal an unreliable narrator, but when it's very clear, if it's not the big twist at the end, if it's clear for most of the book that the narrator is unreliable, especially if it's clear within the first third, I do let the people know in my review this is an unreliable narrator, because I know, I don't know, Ashley, what do you think? 90 more percent of the people who read the review aren't reading the book, right?
Yeah.
I mean, who are writing to? They're just reading the review, right? And they need to know enough about it to tell a patron and seem like they read it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, that makes sense. I have we really aren't disagreeing, but
no, I know. I was trying to make it like, you know, we have it, but it's
a literary device that authors use.
Totally.
Yeah. So if you
totally
say
important that we say it. And it's funny because when Sadie was talking about this on Twitter, I was like, wow, we have different views, but it's based on our audiences.
Right.
So in my reviews, I have, like, kind of like Sadie, I focus on, I only have 200 words max. That's if it gets a star, right? So it's more like 175. And so I don't give much of the plot. I do the plot in 1 to 2 sentences. Right. The rest is all what we call appeal. It's why someone would read the book, the feel of the book, the literary devices, how it's told, the pacing, the characterization, like, is this more action oriented or character oriented? I warn if there's a lot of gore, right? I make comparisons to books they would know. And I, like Sadie, I also try to have like a very hooky line at the end that sort of sums up who the book is best for. In Booklist, I do it, but in Library Journal, they actually call it the verdict, and you actually can give a full sentence.
That's right.
So, and sometimes I say things like, there's a book coming out, it's coming out in a week, but it's from when we're recording, but it'll be in a month from when you see this, but The Loop by Jeremy Robert Johnson. And I talked about how it's like if Mira Grant wrote The Wanderers. So like, you know, if it's like by Chuck Wendig. So it's got that like apocalyptic sort of thing spreading, but it's definitely, even though he's a man, it's a female narrator, and it's got that like woman, you know, a little bit more of a woman touch. And anyway, I just try to give them authors they know, and they're like, I can buy this, right? But like, to transition to Danielle, her books are really easy to sell to libraries because they're gothic, they're spooky, and they're definitely scarier than your average tame gothic. But I think that readers, especially the Ancestor, the newest one, readers can make it as scary as they want. There's room there for the reader. Like, I think Ashley, you'd be fine. But that's an area of horror I don't have to worry about. I don't have to work as hard, right, to curate my review. But I have a notebook with notes. I'm writing down just key appeal terms, like how it's told, one thing I always tell library workers is who's narrating the story, because readers care at the library. Like, is this multiple narrators? Is this from one point of view? That's very important to them. So I'm noting things like that, and then I go type it all up.
What about you, Danielle? What do you think?
Yeah, so my method is a little bit different, I think, than other people's, because I often read 20 books, you know, and I choose maybe 8 for a 2,500 word column. So I'm constantly reading, and I have a file open where I'll just jot down impressions. It's very impressionistic for a long time. And, you know, I'll jot down the pub date and sort of a basic plot summary for myself, and maybe pull some quotes out that demonstrate the feeling of the book or the social message of the book, because I'm also very conscious that I'm writing for a New York Times audience, and even with horror, there's a sort of tendency in the readers of the New York Times to want to know, like, what's the social message here, and what's the importance to our culture that this brings. So I'm very conscious of that. I don't give spoilers, and I do a little bit of plot summary, but not a whole lot. It's more about just the vibe of that book, and also I like to make it flow, right? So if my column is 2,500 words, I like to have I like to think of it as an essay almost. Like, I like to have an introduction that sort of introduces an idea that many of the books sort of category, or as I said, a vibe, or like an interest that a lot of the books sort of follow, and then keep that together. It's harder to do, you know, when you have lots of different books. Like the column I'm writing now for Halloween, I have like 10 books in 2,500 words, and I'm gonna have to cut some out. I mean, there's just a lot of books right now that I want to review. But so yeah, my method is, the hardest part of what I do is actually winnowing down which books are gonna go in, and making it fit together like a column, like not just a bunch of individual reviews. I used to review regularly for People magazine, which was like, you know, 200-word reviews, and very separate, obviously. And so the idea of, like, if I have a 2,500-word review and I'm doing 10 books, having just these separate 250-word reviews that don't fit together, it really irritates me. Something about like the writer in me doesn't want to see that. I want it to feel like an experience in itself. So that's
Danielle, I was gonna call your column like chatty. I feel like you're having a conversation with me when I read it.
Chatty
Like,
horror.
I love that about it. It's like you try really hard to make it cohesive. But can I ask everybody a question? Because it came up kind of with all of us. Do you ever feel guilt when you have to leave books out? Because I feel so much guilt. Like, I similarly have, like, for my column for January that I'm working on now, I have more books that I'm going to be able to review in the file right now. And it's like hurting me to not, like, I feel like personally responsible. And I know that everyone knows you can't fit all of them in, but do either of you feel guilt when you have to take something out?
I don't have word counts, and I don't
Okay.
have a minimum or maximum. I can do 4 reviews for Scream, and my editor at Scream is so mean to me. Rich, you're so mean to me. He makes me put like a 1 or 2 star review book in the magazine, and it just kills me. It kills me. I don't want to advertise a book I don't like.
I only do
But
good
he just
reviews.
thinks that he just doesn't want just only good reviews in his magazine, which I totally understand. It's his magazine. So that's where my guilt comes from, is having to, because I just quit books I don't like, and then I don't really talk about them. I'll finish them and review them, but I don't promote the books I don't like, because I feel like that's sad. Like, I'm not here to make authors feel sad. So I don't draw attention to that. They're there if people want to find them, but I don't draw attention to that. But yeah, so I don't really have limitations on word counts or how many, but I do have stacks of unread books that stare at me accusingly all night long.
The true horror of being a reviewer.
Yeah, there's a horror novel coming about that, I think.
Yeah, that's the real fear.
Yeah.
Danielle, any guilt from you for stuff you have to do?
Tons, because especially when you know, there is a kind of horror community. If you're online, there's people who are doing things to support the horror community, whether that's you know, supporting readings or promoting other people's books, and you feel a responsibility to include that community in your reviews, or at least I do. And the worst thing for me is when someone who I know on social media or whose books I've read before, I'll get their book and I don't like it, right? Because what am I going to say? I mean, I basically I just don't include it. But you know, I feel a tremendous amount of guilt about that, especially because I also am an author.
Yeah.
I know what it feels like to be ignored or to be passed over, and that's, you know, it's hard. It takes years to write a book, and for some people, sometimes it even takes longer than that. And for a lot of people, you know, it's heartbreaking for them not to see themselves reflected in the horror community through reviews. So yeah.
Now I am feeling sad.
Oh, Sadie, I'm so sorry. You know, I guess Ashley and I are really lucky when I write. Well, for Library Journal, I get to pick, and it's like Danielle, I only am doing positive. But for Booklist, their mission is to only have positive reviews, because the idea is library workers are too busy. We do not need to see the reviews of the books we shouldn't buy. We only need to see the ones we should buy. So I get frustrated when I use Publishers Weekly to order. I'm like, why are you trashing this book? Like, I just wasted my time reading this review. But because I ordered books for 15 years for a library in all genres. And I like that about Booklist. But when I get a book from them that I don't like, or that I think is just meh, I have to think about the best reader. And if I can come up with a library patron who I know a library reader will like it, I write my review to that person. So and then I don't put a star on the book. If it's going to be less than 4 stars for me personally, I don't star it on Goodreads, because I don't want to do anything negative to hurt the author's, rating. And it's interesting because like the book list reviews are taken up by Bookmarks, the LitHub's, website. So you can go on and I can see like reviews I've written that they did like positive, and they didn't give a rave. And I'm like, wow, yeah, I did a good job making that book positive because I didn't really like it personally. But that's my job, right? To sell it to the best reader. But if I can't, the good news is the book list still pays us a few dollars if we read it and we cannot come up with a review. So I do appreciate that.
Yeah, I think for me, I do try to think of it that way. Like if it's not for me, it may not be for me. Or it may be like, oh, this is something that like I've seen before, but maybe like someone else hasn't seen it. So I'll like give it for them. But it may not be my thing. So I don't want to put too much of myself in this because I want to hear you guys talk. But Becky always teases me about how much of a scaredy cat I am. And so I just kind of wanted to like ask, like, how do you think that these kind of reviews can help like people like me more get into the genre? Like people who are maybe interested, but also like scared. Like, I know, do people put like, you put warnings to kind of let people know like what's going on? Like, do you, like, are there ways that you like guide people to more like friendly horror or more like intro horror? You know what I mean? Like, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I really just ask you about myself. So, Sadie, what do you think?
But I think Danielle's the good place plus best place to start because she's writing to the most general person who might not ever read horror, right? I mean,
okay.
Yeah, I tend to, I don't telegraph that. I don't say, FYI, this is not scary. Although that said, I'm just thinking about it in the column I'm writing now. I do actually say that. Maybe I was thinking about you, Ashley.
FYI, not scary.
FYI, not scary.
You're going to see a horror column like, this isn't scary. What is she doing? That's amazing.
Why is it horror?
Why is it horror? But I do, that said, seriously, I think there's shades of gray, right? Like there are many, many shades in horror. I have a very wide ecumenical view of what horror is. For example, I consider the Brontes to be foundational horror, and I consider, obviously Frankenstein and Dracula, but I also consider a lot of 19th century crime novels to be horror, right? I think that some of these sort of classic novels that people read in college, they're required reading, they're part of the canon, are actually horror, and they're not necessarily the sort of blood and guts horror that the genre sometimes gets pegged as being only about. So I think there is a wide range. Gothic horror, for example, doesn't usually have the same kind of I don't find it anyway, the same sort of really scary sort of bloody horror that other parts of the genre have.
And I try to use key terms. I used to try to use terms like atmospheric for books that are and like I like sort of like a trigger to the reader. But again, Danielle's writing to a very general audience. I'm writing to a librarian audience who's maybe looking for key appeal terms. So yeah. So whereas Sadie's gonna have a totally different audience. So I use like atmospheric, and I think most library workers know that means it's spooky, but okay. And if I use like an escalating sense of dread, they know that it's definitely a little more intense. But when I use the word visceral, I think I'm giving away Ashley is not gonna read that book. So like I told her to read The Luminous Dead, right? By Starling. And I told her it is intense with dread and extremely claustrophobic, but it's not visceral. Yeah. It's a little visceral. There's a little bit of body stuff, but it's body horror about the science fiction element. And I knew that Ashley likes science fiction. So, but so that's how I do it. There's like keywords I use that I know librarians use in our vernacular of speaking to each other that trigger it, so that they won't hand that book. They won't hand a Stephen Graham Jones to an Ashley, but they will give Silvia Moreno Garcia to Ashley because, and I told you to read Mexican Gothic, right? So it's like, it's got an escalating sense of dread, and there's definitely a monster and there's definitely fear, but it's not too much. But Sadie, you're talking to like fans, so how do you do that?
I was gonna say, what's the horror vocabulary like?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think that my job is, well, first of all, I try not to define horror for anyone, because what is scary for Mother Horror is not going to be scary for someone else, or is going to be scary, and vice versa. Like, in my reviews, you will never catch me saying this is not horror. I hate that. Like, please don't define what a genre is or isn't for anyone, and especially if it's marketed as such. I really think that that's a disservice to the author and to the publishing company if they've marketed it as something. Like, I'm not going to dissuade people from that choice, that label. And so people just sometimes want to know, is it scary? And so I will say, like, this scared the crap out of me. And if Mother Horror says this scared the crap out of me, people are usually like, okay, well, then I need to have it, because I don't throw that away. I don't say that very often. I also don't say I'll say this was too gross for me, or this pushed my boundaries. That will also sell books.
Yeah, I think that would sell a lot of books.
It does sell a lot of books, because there are like, one of your questions, Ashley, that you kind of prepared us for was that whole question about, like, is there anything that's too much for you? I have a lot of boundaries. Like I said, I don't watch horror movies, and part of that is because of the visuals that get stuck in my mind, or the feeling that gets stuck in my heart. And so anything with like children or abuse or torture porn or anything that's rapey, like things that are just too I don't know, just push my boundaries. If I say that in a review, I really have to be careful, because people will go get it. Like, if I say it's disgusting, or if I say it bothered me to the point where I quit reading it, they'll all go get it. They love that stuff. My audience loves that stuff. So, and what's really weird is I'm starting to really like it too. So I am. Chandler Morrison, if you're watching, I'm reading your books because they're gross.
Are there any other like boundaries that people do not like to pass? I'm so curious about this. Becky, are there any boundaries where you're like, I can't do this?
Like Sadie, I'm not a huge movie horror fan. The tension is so much for me when it's on the screen, even though they're shorter. It's too much. And then, like, I used to think that like sexual violence was a no-go for me, but like one of my favorite Brian Keene books is Castaways, and there is but it is based on another historic text, and it is to show how bad the bad guys are and all this. But so I think it just depends on the author. I think for me, I am so driven by the characters. And that's why I think Castaways by Brian Keene works for me, even though there's sexual violence, because his characters are so good. He writes great characters, both good and bad. And I get sucked into the characters. So for me, if there's too much of the things I normally don't like, and the characters are way too broadly, sketched out, and I'm not connecting with them, whether I love them or hate them, right? If I don't appreciate the characters, even the ones that are complicated, right? I can't take the other things I don't like. And so that's where I was thinking back to some of the books I've read recently where I had to do that thing where I said, where I have to think about the best reader because it's not me. It's the characters that were not as good. And again, that's me. There's lots of people who read for plot over character, and so they're going to like those stories more. So for me, I'm less tolerant when I don't connect with the characters.
Or trust the author, like you said, because there's a lot of authors that I trust to go there.
Right.
Danielle, any hard stops?
So for me, the biggest, my only boundary is bad writing. If it's not,
I love that.
If it's not well written, I don't care where they take me. If it's well written, I'll go there. I really love someone who has perfected their craft, right? Who's put in the work and clearly has fully imagined the world that they're writing about, and loves to write and loves to communicate with a reader. All of that is like really important to me. And, I often, and in many interviews and all the time, say I don't like the idea of genre. I mean, genre for me is convenient. It's a convenient way to classify certain things. But really, for me, it's good or bad writing. And, there's a lot of great horror writers who write very well. I also, I'm super sensitive to horror movies, but I do love certain horror movies. Like, I'm a big fan of, The Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby, sort of classic horror movies, but also Get Out, and The Shape of Water, and, and Parasite, and sort of newer horror films that somehow wrap a social message or a larger theme into horror. And I find that books that are doing that now are the most exciting for me.
Yeah.
So.
No, you mentioned a lot of, like, that to me is probably the most fascinating thing. And I think a lot of people want their genre stuff to be without politics.
Mm-hmm.
But like a lot of the most famous horror things have politics.
Always.
Oh, so true.
Like Night of the Living Dead. I have seen that, and like, that had me shook when I read it the first time. And of course, Get Out, and some of the stuff that Jordan Peele's doing, Candyman. You've got all these things that have this like connection to it.
Well, like I'm watching Lovecraft Country right now, and the book, I loved the book, and it was written by a white man. And now I'm watching the TV show, and all the things I liked about the book are even better with Black creatives writing the story. Like Misha Green is the showrunner, and she wrote almost all the screenplays. And it's interesting how it's so connected to the book. It's very much a good adaptation in terms of staying true to the book, but the subtext of the racial issues from the time in the 50s and 60s is one thing, mostly the late 50s and early 60s, and then looking at it as told by somebody who made the show today, so much scarier, right, with those two lenses. And I really think that it makes a difference when we have a connection to our real world. And that's why I think actually that horror is so popular right now, because the world is a dumpster fire and your horror book is not real, and it's probably slightly worse. Hopefully.
Yeah, sometimes the good guys win. Not always, but
Not always.
Too. Man, I love. I could talk about Lovecraft Country for an hour, but I don't want to do that. Let's see. I think we're getting a little bit close to our stop time. I'm trying to think. Is there? I guess real quick, how does writing reviews help you, like in any other forms of writing that you might do? I know it's kind of helped me in some of the other writings I've had to do. So has writing review has it helped you kind of expand your writing in other arenas in any kind of way? Danielle,
I can just say that not expand, but it helped me retract in a good way, because I think before I started reviewing horror for the New York Times, I would just write without any concept of genre, right? Mm-hmm. I wrote a novel called Angelology, and it combines, looking at it now, it combines a lot of Gothic horror elements with mystery and biblical mythology. I just wrote that without having any sort of consciousness of convention, of genre conventions. I just wrote from what I loved, right? And now I think that if I had, were writing that book now, it would be more lean, right? It would have much more of the genre in it. And I think that it's helped me to sort of classify, and not classify so much as refine what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And it's given me a language for my own fiction in a way that I just didn't have before. So
it helped me so much. So I run the blog Ari for All, where I review books all the time, some of them not for pay, but I was getting so overwhelmed with the number of books in all genres that I was being asked to review and trying to point out to library workers, that it made me realize I didn't have to give all those words to every book, right? So I've made my other reviews much shorter. And my focus on not having the room and being forced to not do a lot of words made me rethink how I do other reviews. So now I say I do roundups on Goodreads or I do on my blog, because that's the whole thing. Like, I want my blog to be searchable for library workers to find titles. So I do roundups with the titles and then the 3 words that best describe the book, which is based on another librarian who came up with that idea. I have a citation in my book, but I can't remember it right now. And what I do is I say, you know what? I'm going to put them on Goodreads, not on my blog anymore. So when I put them on Goodreads, the plot summary is already there, you know? So I tell myself, I don't need to summarize the book. There's the book jacket, for better or worse, those descriptions. So I'm going to focus on why someone want to read the book. So I don't even do any plot in those reviews. And that has helped me a lot. And it still helps people. But I was literally burning myself out with the number of words I was writing. And I just got better at doing it more quickly and more succinctly. And it's helped me a lot professionally.
I think just writing reviews has given me a huge appreciation for the office of being an author. I have a newfound respect for people who can put together words in such a way that can move people to tears or make people frightened or give people a sense of paranoia or anxiety. Like, that is the powerful stuff, you know, these wordsmithers that can turn a whole genre into something that moves people to write about it, like me. So I just think that sitting down in front of my computer and trying to take what's in my brain and put it into words has given me just an enormous amount of respect for the job of the authors. And I think when I see authors being abused by fellow reviewers, or if I see people tagging authors in negative reviews, or if people write negative reviews with a lot of like cussing and sarcasm and insults, it really like offends me, just because I know how much work goes into just writing a review of a book, that the book itself must take, you know, it's a painstaking process. And so I think in that sense, it has really changed and shifted the way that I write my own reviews. And I've dabbled in writing fiction, but I'm not going to do that. It's like, I don't even know how thick-skinned you have to be to do this job, but like, I could never. So, I mean, I've done it for charity, and I've done it, you know, to promote like little startup publishing companies who wanted me to, invited me to an anthology or whatever. So, but I have no plans to write a novel or anything. That is a scary world, that you talk about true horror, putting yourself out there like that. Holy Moses.
Yeah, Danielle, we'll leave that to you. I have no desires to ever write horror fiction. I write about horror professionally, and that's good. Danielle, you can have it.
Okay? Yes, so scary. And you're good at it, Danielle.
You are. You're very good. And talking about the emotions, I was actually thinking about Danielle's last book, The Ancestor. Like, she this woman I never knew, you get caught up in her life. You know, it's this like, you're actually a princess and you're going off to Italy, but it's not. It's definitely dark from the start. This is not like, you know, there's warning signs that something's going on, and it's not like your typical princess story, because it turns and, you know, changes. But I was caught up with her right away. I was like, wait, what's going on? Okay, she's going. How's she gonna get there? Why? Oh my gosh, it's so remote. Like, and she doesn't exist. She's not real. So
yeah, but we're worried about her though, aren't we?
Yes.
Oh no, we're still worried. What's going on?
I know.
Where is she now?
And no one knows where she is. This is not a good idea.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I would love to hear you guys talk about this stuff forever, but I think we're gonna have to wrap it up. So my final question, are there any books that you're looking forward to reading, or anything that you just read that you loved?
Let's let Sadie go first so she remembers.
Okay, yeah.
Tell me how to pronounce it again, though. You told me like an hour ago.
Say the title.
Say the title. Okay, so Ring Shout by
we think it's P.
Djeli Clark is my favorite book of the year. It is a dark fantasy but it's horror adjacent because there are some very tense, scary moments. And it is about, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but it is about a young girl who is tasked with the job of slaying Ku Klux Klan members who may not be what they appear to be. And it is, I just got chills. It is, I read that so fast, like I couldn't turn the pages fast enough. And it was very vivid and colorful in my brain. So that and The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones are like the two for the year that really sing.
I was told not to read that one, so.
I mean, you can, but it's
got some stuff.
Yeah, it's got, I like that, Sadie.
There's some
Sadie
stuff.
Hartman.
Danielle, do you have any recommendations?
I'm like looking around my office here, seeing which books I have. I just have, part of the problem with what I do is I have so many books that I read and I love. One thing, I'm not gonna say it's my favorite, but it's something that I look forward to finishing and that I'm reading. I'll just pull it over here. Is this is coming out.
Oh yeah, I just got that.
Yeah, this is coming out.
Oh, yeah, I reviewed it in the October issue of Library Journal.
Oh, you did? And it's called Tiny Nightmares, and I really am enjoying it. I'm not finished yet, but it's a lot. It's, I would say about 40 very, very short horror stories. And, I'll be, boiling water for tea or something, and I'll read one.
Ooh, bite size.
What?
Is it bite size horror?
Yeah, they're under
bite size.
1,500 words. They're under 1,500 words each.
Right. They're very
I love it. I love that.
and they're really good. And they're the kind of story that some of them have the emotional power of a novel, right? It's some of them are that powerful. So it's just this very economic way, I guess, of reading a lot of really great horror stories.
That's
and it has
awesome.
authors that are like literary, quote unquote. It has authors across international. My favorite story in that whole book is called Fingers by Rachel, I think it's Hang.
Oh, I haven't read that yet.
Oh, go read it. It's still with me.
Okay.
It's good.
I
only had room to pull out one story, but yeah, no, that's a good one. So the book, I mentioned that Usman Malik that's coming out, but the book that I read this year that's going to also, I have a star review for a ring shout in the October issue of Library Journal, but I also have a star review for one of my favorite young horror authors, who's Gwendolyn Keist. I cannot say enough nice things about her. Her book, The Rust Maidens, I read. I think it was one of those books that like came to me from my editor at Booklist magically, like in the mail. And I read it, and it was, I put it on best lists. It won the best first novel for the Stoker. Like, it blew people away.
Ashley, you should read that for sure.
Yeah, Ashley, you should read that because it also has a socioeconomic Midwest focus on girls. It's set in Cleveland. You can look up my review. It'll give you a good sense on Booklist online. But the book, her new book, Bone Set and Feathers, which I just gave a star review to, like I said, it'll be out by the time you guys see this, is like the feminist witch story you are all waiting for. It is a woman with agency, but she's extremely flawed in that she is, I don't want to give stuff away, but she is damaged from when the first time there was a purge of the witches in her community. She's the only one that didn't die. And you find out why, and the terrible curse she has. And then it is a story for now because it is about fighting the bullies and standing up to the people in charge, even when you think you have no agency and no power. And literally the head bad guy is like the bully on Twitter, or like the politician that you don't like. And it's great. And it's about girl power and friendship and found family. And it's all under 200 pages.
I'm so excited.
Wow, good sell.
When is that out, Becky?
Well, thank you.
Well, I'm sorry, it's
so
out.
much.
I think it's out the end of this month. It's a small press. It's called Bone Set and Feathers. And so because it's a small press, and it was like right around the end of this month or the beginning of October, they let me sneak it in. With the small presses, I get a little more leeway. Yeah.
Cool.
I'm so excited for all these books. Thank you all so much. Sadie Hartman, Danielle Cruzoni, and Becky Stratford. Like I said, I'm Ashley Rayner. And this has been Horror Reviews for Librarians. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Ashley.
Bye.
Bye.